finally, I just said, listen, I'm willing to have one more conversation with you because I feel like you need to be heard. But I want you to understand before we start, I will not change my position, but I'm going to be willing to hold space for you to tell me how you feel about it. And we went on this 1 mile walk, which is in my neighborhood. And I let them tell me how mad they were at me, how frustrating it was, all the consequences that they thought they were having as a result of the boundary, how ridiculous they thought my position was. And I just said, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. I think I'm doing the right thing as a parent. And at the end of it, we hugged, and I did not change the boundary. But I had to have a willingness to hold firm and also hold space.
Mm-hmm. You're listening to When God Intervenes, the podcast where faith, hope, and healing come together for families with a loved one battling addiction. All right, I'm back here with Erin McNamee and Neely Lyons with the Family Recovery Collective. And I'm just going to let you introduce yourselves a little bit, talk about your background a little bit, and then we'll talk about your program and what you're doing with it.
So my name's Neely Carlton Lyons. I am a lawyer by training, and about over 10 years ago, I started my recovery journey. I am a person in long-term recovery from addiction and codependency. And I sometimes tell people that I've sat in all the seats on the bus because I come from a family that was touched by addiction and mental health issues. I have experienced it in my own life and marriage, and have 3 beautiful children that are in their own journeys of having to live in a family touched by addiction. So we have a lot of conversation in my house. It's an open conversation around addiction and mental health issues. And since this is Mental Health Awareness Month, I want to be sure that I talk openly about it because I think that does help address stigma. I am from a family that was very closed and quiet about any struggle. And I am obviously, with my accent, you can tell I'm from the South. So there's that cultural overlay of stigma associated with addiction and mental health issues. So the recovery that I am experiencing is from all of that, if you will. And in my professional experience, I have represented individuals struggling with addiction and mental health issues, as well as represented treatment centers and impaired licensees who have reasons to be investigated by their board of licensure. And the parallel between my life and my professional life led me ultimately to a decision that I wanted to work with families, because there are lots of resources out there for individuals that are struggling if people are willing to access them. But there are very few resources out there that I've found that are family centric. That was a real passion for me. And Erin and I have been friends for a long time. And so what we discovered is that we had a mutual passion for helping families. And I'll let Erin describe her journey at this time.
Thanks, Neely.
Thanks, Neely. And thanks, Daryl, so much for having us. We're thrilled to be here and just excited to kind of get to know you better and your community of people and the people that you help. My name's Dr. Erin McNamee. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I live in Florida. Notice the lack of an accent, or maybe maybe I have an accent to other people. I'm not sure. But I did not grow up with addiction in my household, but I definitely grew up with some anxiety, and a lot of worriers seem to be in my family. And through my life, people in my family developed addiction, and also friends and other loved ones who came into my life also struggled. And my professional background, I've been a therapist now for, 16 years maybe, or somewhere in there. And I've worked in substance abuse treatment. I was a therapist there, and I worked into administration. I eventually became a clinical director of a treatment center. And now I'm in private practice in Florida. I have a practice in Boca Raton, and I treat all kinds of issues related to trauma. So addiction being one of those, as well as codependency. I work a lot with families and friends, and I am a family and friend of people who struggle with addiction. I think that, Neely and I, as Neely mentioned, we've been friends for a long time, and we both work with people in addiction and recovery in all facets. And we come at it from slightly different angles, but we do a lot of similar work. And we both felt, she had mentioned that the sort of lack of resources out there that centered the family and friends. And that's what I found as well, especially when I became a family and friend of people who struggled with this. Here I had all of this knowledge and all of this background and understanding of addiction and how to treat it and how it worked. And I'm really fortunate that I have a lot of professional connections as well. So I know a lot of people in different treatment centers all across the country. I found that it was so challenging when I was walking through with a very close loved one who was struggling and trying to get that person to want treatment, eventually get them into treatment, have struggles while they were in treatment, and just navigate the whole thing. And that was really a light bulb moment for me, because I thought, if this is hard for me, I work in this field. I'm connected to a lot of different people where I can pick up the phone and call somebody and ask a question, and someone who can tell me a great answer. What must it be like to be handed this experience with a family or friend and not have any of that? Where do you go and what do you do and how do you start to sift through the information that's out there to figure out what is real and valid and that's going to be the best fit for your family? We like to say, like, if a loved one is addicted, like, let's say I have a son and that son is struggling. And so what do? I Google, that's what most of us
Right.
do. So I Google, my son has an addiction.
Mhm.
And what I'll get usually is a link to a blog that literally says what to do if your son has an addiction. And I think, great, here it is, right? But we get to that blog, and usually that blog is really general. It's really like, oh, you need to get help.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
thanks, blog. Like, that was super informative, but you get this general kind of, you need to get help, seek out a professional. That person might need treatment, get them evaluated. And usually that blog is connected to a treatment center. And so now you're kind of at what we call the mercy of the marketing, right? You get pulled into that, like, okay, they're on this blog, they're telling me what to do. This must be a good place. You look at their stuff, it looks nice, it looks, like they do a lot of things, but you really have no idea if
That's
that
right.
place is going to be a great fit for you, if they're, they have good practices or if they don't. And so that was a lot of the birthplace of Family Recovery Collective, was us recognizing, there's really a limit to information that's out there. And the information that's out there is usually connected to treatment centers. And so what are people supposed to do if they're not sure which treatment center to go to, or if their loved one isn't willing to go? The vast majority of people with a substance use disorder in particular never go to treatment.
Yeah.
And so you've got families out there too, where they're not connected to any treatment center and they have a loved one who won't do it. And so also, where are they supposed to go, for information? I'm a member of Al-Anon, and, Al-Anon is such a great support system in terms of how to kind of stay in the solution. And I think there's a ton of community support groups out there. You've mentioned the one that you're involved with. There's a Smart Recovery for families. There's, different things where people can go and get involved. And where we wanted to kind of fill in the gap was the education piece. So, where community support groups, in my opinion, kind of what they don't cover is the education, is like, what is addiction? What is recovery? What is actually going on in my loved one's brain? How is this addiction actually impacting me? Like, what am I going through? So we really wanted to create something where people could have access to that information that you might get at the best treatment centers in the world, who have incredible family programs, But we wanted to make that information accessible to people who weren't connected to that particular treatment center, or whose loved one won't go, or maybe they are somewhere, but they don't have a big family component. We wanted to create something that could give that information. We also wanted we wanted to be really accessible to people, where they didn't have to travel to a different state or spend a long weekend somewhere, that they had access to it in their own home, in their own privacy, that they could interact with the information that they wanted to. And that was kind of what got us started on creating Family Recovery Collective. And so just to tell you a little bit about what it is it's an online information and support membership for when a loved one is addicted. We have courses, we have a bunch of videos and worksheets that are Neely and I, talking and kind of leading you through different aspects of addiction and recovery. We talk about codependency, we talk about boundaries, we talk about what the experience is like when you love someone with an addiction, how that can impact you. We provide a lot of different resources. Our philosophy is there's no one way to get sober, and there's no one way to heal from the trauma of a loved one's addiction. But we want to empower people to really understand there's a lot of different things out there, and we want to help them kind of filter through it and figure out, okay, which pieces of this would be the best fit for me and for my family. We talk about different types of interventions. We talk about all kinds of stuff. And we also have support spaces. So we have what looks like a social media news feed, but again, it's only for our members. So it's protected. It's not just out there all across Facebook or anything. And it's where people can connect with each other based on the relationship they have with their loved one. We have, for example, we have parents, we have a parents group, we have a partners group, we have the whole collective. So we have one that's just general for everyone. And then we also bring in different experts. So we are experts in our fields, but we don't know everything. So we bring in people to talk about all different aspects. So for example, we've got someone coming in to talk about gambling. We've got in other process addictions. We've had people come in and talk about collegiate recovery. We've had people come in and talk specifically about marijuana use and how that's changing. So just all these kind of really nuanced, but very specific things that are happening that are under that umbrella of addiction and recovery. So we do live Q&As with those experts, but we also archive those interviews so that people can go back and read and listen to them again. So we really just wanted to create something that was kind of all encompassing, where people could just go get support, get information for those of us that like to learn about things and understand things. We are not affiliated with any treatment center or any specific provider. We don't endorse any one way, again, to get sober or to get well when your loved one is addicted, but we do share a ton of different options.
Okay.
And because we want people to really understand, like, hey, we've got some knowledge here, we're willing to share it, this is what's out there. And so you can kind of understand the bigger picture of the information, and then be able to apply that if you're looking for help.
I think it's great to have one place that, for families and friends to be able to go to access that kind of information, and for it to be organized in a way, they can get the education they need, they can find all the resources they need instead of just Googling and being all over the place. I think it's a really good idea.
Awesome. Thank you. That's our goal. We like to say, like, no one's handed a manual of what to do when your loved one's addicted, but we wanted to come as close to possible as to create that manual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're doing a good job with that, and I remember what that was like going through that myself, and the first thing I did was Google interventions, just because I had seen just a few little snippets of the show, and it kind of planted the seed in my mind, and I didn't really know much about it, but I just felt like that's what we needed, and anyway, that's exactly what I did.
Right. That's what most people do, right?
But yeah, and the information is just overwhelming. There is so much information out there, and you don't know what's right and what's wrong. And, it's just, so it's great to have a place for families to go to be able to get that type of information and training. Neely,
Daryl, I was going to add that on the point about interventions, on the Family Recovery Collective platform, there is a resource that identifies all the different types of intervention. And then that way, if you were a person who was seeking an intervention, then you would be much more informed about the style of intervention that you thought would work for your family and know how to talk to an interventionist about their services. And so that is offered as part of our resource pages.
Yeah. That's really important that they be able to see those different methods, that and pick what they think will work best for them and their family. Neely, so walk me through a little bit of some of the legal issues that parents might deal with when they're coming into this. Because I really haven't talked to anyone. I haven't interviewed anyone that has the kind of background that you do, and I feel like and I've heard them over the years. I've heard a few of them, and I would like to hear you talk about what are some of the top things that come to mind,
Sure.
that parents deal with, and how can they handle those issues.
Sure. Well, so first let me say that the Family Recovery Collective does not offer therapeutic or legal services. So, but I'm happy to ask the question because I think it's a great question. And I'll start by saying that legal consequences are one of the consequences that we would, I'm sure Erin, professionals in this field would say are flags or signals to a family or a loved one that this may be more than just a bad weekend, one or two unfortunate situations. This may be part of the setup or ongoing chronic disease process that is the brain disease of addiction. So if a family has a loved one who's beginning to experience legal consequences and they think it's related to their mental health or substance use or process addiction, then they need to be looking for more information. Having said that, some of the common legal issues will fall first and foremost under family law. So are they experiencing a tremendous struggle in that marriage relationship that's leading the couple to consider divorce, for example? Or is there has there already been a divorce and there's a lot of issues around custody and visitation and anything of that nature? Family law judges, family law professionals are going to tell you that it's very common for addiction and mental health issues to be a part of that conversation. The other big, of course, standout is going to be DUI or any kind of criminal matter, or maybe it's just a personal property issue. I mean, I've had many experiences, not me personally, but professionally. I've had many professional experiences where there's been an accident. Someone has, wrecked a car or had a personal injury where that it is somehow tied to addiction or substance use. And then, I would say there's this whole other area of consideration, which is whether or not the person needs to have a guardian, a conservatorship, whether or not there's a trust involved. If this person is a trust beneficiary, are they using the funds from the trust to accelerate their use, and is that problematic? And how do you work with trustees to get the brakes and on the situation and get this person into treatment? And what does that look like? So those are prominent legal issues that come out. It's going to be some interchange with the criminal justice system, some interchange with the family court system, which might include trust, and then some interchange with just the civil law system, which is going to be damages or financial. I guess I should throw in there, like in the case of gambling or gaming addiction, it may be that there's serious financial consequences. Maybe they're spending all their money on an internet gambling site, for example. So it can take a lot of different shapes and forms under the umbrella of legal consequences. Anytime you start to see that happen, as a family member, I would encourage you to start asking more questions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. So the DWI is a big one, for me, because that's how we lost our son. It was in an impaired, drug impaired, wreck. And, I've heard that it's about, DWI cost about $10,000 on average, but in legal fees and everything. I have parents call me a lot of times and just say, they start going through the story with me, giving me the backstory, and their child has a car that's in their name. Their name is on the title, and they're paying for the insurance, but their child is using drugs and alcohol, and they're obviously worried about it. So it's an addiction, and the first thing I tell them to do is take away the car, or at least take their name off the title. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about liability
Yeah,
exposure
yeah,
for anything that they may have do while they're using the car.
yeah.
And every jurisdiction is going to have a different perspective, legal
Hmm.
precedent on this. And so I just want to speak very generally. Yes, there is the potential that you could be held vicariously liable for the actions, particularly if you have reason to believe that your loved one who's driving a car in your name has an addiction issue, and you're not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I would say that. But I want to speak for a second to this issue about these points along the way before the DUI comes up that sometimes seem insignificant or momentarily a crisis point that seems to dissipate. And I think it's very common for families to, if we were going to put this on a graph, they will, for whatever reason, they will put all the, they went to college and they got good grades and they have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or they have their first job, or they're still married. All those things will be at the top. But on the bottom, they took 8 years to graduate because they kept dropping out, or they had a semester where they struggled, and they've had repetitive girlfriend or boyfriend issues. All those things that I would say are more concerning seem to drop off the radar. And what I would suggest to you is that oftentimes families that we work with, in hindsight, look back and they can see that there might be moments or periods where things were going well, but the trend line is downward. But at the moment you don't see it. You only see the high marks. You're like, oh, well, they figured it out. They figured it out. They figured it out. But it looks more like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I'm really talking about, in the legal issues aspect, that it's important to break through denial, break through stigma, be willing to go seek out the information, whether it's through our offering or others, and ask those hard questions of that loved one about how they're really doing. In the other areas of consideration, we would encourage individuals to consider, how is their health, their overall health? How is their mental and physical health doing? If they are professional or working in the workplace, what are those workplace relationships like?
Right.
And certainly a marriage or a love relationship is going to be a place where some of this stuff seems to show up. There's an old saying that says, it's the 4 L's: the liver, which means, are you having medical issues? The license, are you having professional issues? The law, which is what we were talking about, are you having legal issues? And the love, so are you having struggles within your intimate and close relationships? And you want to look at all 4 areas, I guess, is what I'm recommending.
Yeah, that's really good. So, Erin, what kind of things do you see with families? Is there anything that kind of sticks out in your mind that's new, that's going on right now, or are there any tips that you have for parents? in particular.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I want to acknowledge, Daryl, you talked and you've talked with Neely and I before about the loss of your son. And
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate, we appreciate you being so open about that and that you carried on obviously with some purpose here, and you're sharing to that loss to help other people. And that's part of why you have us on here. So I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge that. Yeah. What came up as you and Neely were talking about the law and that stuff. I was kind of sitting here thinking like, okay, what would I say to a family, and I think the the tricky stuff is, so when you start to see things happening, especially if you're talking about your teenager or your young adult, and you they're hardwired to make stupid decisions at that age, right? Like they're all pushing off
Yeah.
of the families they're born into. We're biologically hardwired to do that, to take big risks, or we would never leave home. And so part of parenting an adolescent is that they're going to do things, that they're going to make mistakes, they're going to get into trouble. And I think a lot of parents and families are trying really hard to discern, is this normal teenage behavior, or has something clicked over in their brain that this is now addictive behavior?
Mm-hmm.
And so I see families really kind of trying to struggle with that, question. And I think one of the things to do is be patient as you're trying to figure that out,
Mm-hmm.
because the actions of what I would say to do are the same, regardless of if this is just a one-off situation, or they're just acting out and pushing off and taking risks, or there's a brain issue, where the brain has started to go into an addictive neural pathway that they are not in control of.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it's really looking at where the boundaries are, setting those boundaries, like you said, take your name off the car, maybe take away the car. Where I see parents really getting into a struggle is doing something and setting a boundary that they think is going to hurt something else. So like if I take away the car, they can't get to school, or they can't get to work. And so I can only do so much
Right.
without like kind of making life harder for them, and also maybe making life harder for me, because
That's
I'm going to be
right. Yeah.
driving them everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And that's not sustainable. I don't want them, I'm going to ground them for a week, but then there is a consequence to that, in the sense of, usually for everyone, like they're miserable, they're angry, they're upset. And so you're spending a week with your really mad teenager,
Mm-hmm.
and limiting their social contact. And so people start to get into, is that the right way? Or, what am I doing here? But really looking at the boundaries of like, where are they showing you that they're not yet ready to handle all the responsibility that they have? So if they, for example, are continuously coming home past curfew, like they're telling you, I'm not at a level where I'm responsible enough to come home on time. And so kind of looking at what consequence fits that piece.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it sounds like you're not yet ready to be out on the weekends. And so until you are, we're going to pull back on that. Like making the consequence specific to the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like things like that. And so the more boundaries you're setting, it's going to give you more information on whether or not, if it's still behavior that keeps continuing, that's when you start to go, okay, I'm setting boundaries, we're setting limits. They nod and they repeat what I say, and they're still not able to do the thing. You may be dealing with something that they can't help at that point, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I remember going through that, and when you have a teenager, they're going through all these changes anyway. And with Chase, he was the oldest, so he was my first teenager, and
Right.
I'm just like, well, is this normal teenage behavior, or is there something else going on? Yeah, and it's really hard to discern for parents in that situation
Mhm.
a lot of times.
Did you
Well,
know? I'm sorry. I was just going to ask Daryl, like,
No,
were
go
you able
ahead.
to kind of figure that out? Did you figure out like, okay, this is addiction?
Not right away. It took a little while. I was still trying to figure it out, didn't know for sure. And we transferred him to a military school and he graduated. He did a lot better while he was there and he graduated. And but then his first year of college is really his first semester of college, immediately began using. And I knew almost right away when he
Right.
started college.
Yeah. So that's
He had
exactly
that.
it. Like you're intervening in the same way,
Yeah.
and eventually you're gonna know. It's gonna
Yeah.
reveal itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, all of a sudden, he no longer had us. He was in college in another state. And he no longer had us to set those boundaries. He didn't
Mhm.
have the military school, so he had all this freedom all of a sudden.
Mhm.
And so he was out there experimenting with everything.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I
Go
was just going
ahead.
to
Go ahead.
add to the conversation
Hmm.
that I would recommend that families get their own support. That the support that we're discussing is not just find out all you can about what's going on with them. Also get the support you need because
Yeah.
as Erin describes this struggle to discern and the blowback that happens when you set boundaries, I'm thinking about that saying that the people who have benefited from you not having certain boundaries are going to object when you set them. And so
That's
the
right.
the admonishment or suggestion I have for parents and families is be ready, because when it changes, they're going to do things not in a very conscious way, though I'm certain that there are times when it is conscious, but in an
Hmm.
unconscious way, they are going to test the boundary.
That's
They're
right.
going to try to see, do you mean it? And, that's a normal reaction to a change in a relationship,
Hmm.
that particularly where one person is the authoritarian over another. And
Hmm.
that the thing that surprises me is how much parents struggle with that process.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and I can admit to my own struggles in that process because I grew up in a family. You were talking about birth order, right? I'm the youngest in my family. And by the time I'm much younger than my brothers, and by the time I got to those ages, frankly, I just think my parents were tired. And as
Yeah.
long as I came home and made good grades, I don't know that it really mattered what I was doing, and
Right.
I knew that. So the thing that's but so when I came into parenting and I wanted to do things differently, and I saw my children uh, struggling,
Hmm.
particularly around electronics, and I had to start
Hmm.
setting the boundaries and expectations around use of electronics. Then I had to also deal with my own reluctancy to that boundaries felt like punishment
Hmm.
instead
Hmm.
of where I am now, which is that they're loving and kind and necessary.
Mhm.
When your child shows you that they can't and they're not ready to make those decisions to set the boundaries themselves with electronics, then you have to do it. Yeah, guess what? That means they're going to come and tell you they're bored. Guess what else? They're going to come and bang on your door and have some excuse why they need it. They've got to
Right.
check it. Mom, I can't let my streaks go, or whatever the heck that.
Right.
So, but they're very meaningful to them. So I remember this. I'll just tell one anecdote. I remember this boundary I set with one of my children, and they kept coming to me and saying, can we do this? Can we do that? And finally, I just said, listen, I'm willing to have one more conversation with you because I feel like you need to be heard. But I want you to understand before we start, I will not change my position, but I'm going to be willing to hold space for you to tell me how you feel about it. And we went on this 1 mile walk, which is in my neighborhood. And I let them tell me how mad they were at me, how frustrating it was, all the consequences that they thought they were having as a result of the boundary, how ridiculous they thought my position was. And I just said, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. I think I'm doing the right thing as a parent. And at the end of it, we hugged, and I did not change the boundary. But I had to have a willingness to hold firm and also hold space.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, that is a big thing that parents struggle with, is especially early on, is setting the boundaries, but especially maintaining the boundaries
Mhm.
when they do get the pushback. And that's why you're right, they do need that support.
Mhm.
And there are all kinds of support groups out there. I facilitate a PAL group, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. It's a free group for parents to join. And those are all over the country. Some are online, like my group, and others are in person. But then there's Al-Anon, and, I do the family recovery coaching because some parents need more accountability and more direction and more accountability specifically around holding those boundaries, and doing their own self-care, if that's the
Sarah,
term
can
you want
I
to
ask you
use.
a question?
Uh-huh.
So when you are coaching families around boundaries,
Hmm.
do you think that their ability to hold boundaries is largely related to how they were raised, what the boundaries were in their household? Yeah.
Sometimes I think fear is a big thing. They have fear and shame are probably the two biggest emotions, that I see. Fear being the biggest one by far. And the fear is almost always irrational. Like,
Mhm.
if I do this, if I set this boundary or if I maintain this boundary, something bad could happen. And I see the same thing happen with interventions. A lot of times they're scared to do the intervention because they're afraid that their loved one will get angry,
Right.
and that there will be a big blow up, and then something bad will happen out of that. And it's a game of what ifs. And
Amen.
so, yeah, I have to help them really get their emotions under control so that they can set and maintain those healthy boundaries. And sometimes, if they don't already have a therapist, refer them out to a therapist, but
Well,
yeah, it's a different thing with a coach, obviously, that where you're helping them set goals around, putting the focus more back on their own lives and off of, their child, being so hyper focused on their child.
Right. Right. I
Erin,
want
you talk about naming it,
to.
naming the fear. Mhm.
Yeah, just saying that, like, my Cliff's Notes version for any therapy is always like, well, let's just name that. Like, have you just had the conversation of like, we're afraid that this is gonna cause a rift with us, and so it stops us from setting limits for you. But if we don't set limits for you, then we recognize we're setting you up for a big fall, And so
Mhm.
being able to kind of just say that, and it's again, they're not always going to like you,
Right.
but hopefully they feel the love, or there many, many children grow up and say like, yeah, I didn't feel loving at the time. And now I get that it
Mhm.
was totally loving.
That's right. Yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
I do want to dip back into a question you asked, is sort of what are we seeing? What are the trends?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like you work with a lot of parents. And so one of the two big things I'll mention, one is marijuana
Hmm.
and how much that has changed, especially in the last 10 to 12 years. It has become something that used to be, what people in my generation, would say is like not that big of a deal or
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
but the THC content when we were growing up was 5% or less. 5% or less
Hmm.
THC in marijuana. And
Yeah.
since 2012, that graph has literally gone from 5% straight up. And in the last 10 years or so, we're now seeing THC content over 90%
Yeah.
in some cases. And so there's concentrates, they're referred to as dabs, they can get with the high 90s. You can also see higher concentrates in any type of edible, gummies, things like that. And we also see high concentrates in the cartridges. That's the oil that comes in
Hmm.
a vape
Hmm.
pen. And so people are doing much, much higher THC content than they ever used to. And what we're actually seeing as a result of that is a lot of psychosis. and psychiatric issues in people who are teens and especially early 20s, for sure. It's absolutely impacting that age range in a very specific and catastrophic way. Some people who develop a psychosis, and that would be like a paranoid delusion, is pretty common, continue to have a psychotic disorder. There's a percentage of people who will have a persistent psychotic issue that they'll have to manage for the rest of their lives, right? So it's a big, big deal. We're also seeing in that population something called cannabinoid hyperemesis, which is cyclic vomiting. And so that number continues to grow. If you have a child or, young adult who is constantly having stomach issues and throwing, and there's no real understanding or reason, that would be the first place I would look at that. People used to say you can't get addicted to marijuana. That's absolutely untrue, especially with the higher THC concentrates. If you think about what happened with the opioid epidemic, where we went from, a Percocet to fentanyl. Right. Fentanyl was a much higher concentrate of an opiate, right? And so this is the same thing. It's just in the marijuana industry. And because it's legal in a lot of states, and because people can get it to manage their anxiety, when someone gets usually a card, we call it down here in Florida, you get a card that is like to be able to go and take and get marijuana from a dispensary. It says the amount you can get, but it does not specify the percentage of THC in what you're doing. Yep. So it might say like you get this many grams, this many joints, this many edibles, but whether you're getting something that's 5% THC or 45% THC, it's not specified on there. So it's like a doctor giving something, being like, what dose do you want? Like, do you want like a super duper antibiotic or a mid-level? Like, yeah. So that's a big, big, big shift, as well as gaming. So gaming is one of the only process addictions. Gambling is in the DSM, but gaming is starting to get a lot of attention and in an addictive sense. And it's starting to be the sort of two texts that classify disorders, substance abuse, and other mental health disorders. So in the States, we have the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. We call it the DSM. And that's how we classify any mental health issue for insurance purposes. And internationally, we have the International Classification of Diseases. It's called the ICD. These are both updated every so often. The ICD is worldwide, and it contains mostly medical diagnoses, but also psychiatric and mental health. And so the ICD has classified gaming disorder, and that's sort of a start as we look at sort of social media use. And, right now we call it problematic social media use. We don't call it addiction at this point, but gaming is on there. With the legalization of gambling, especially sports betting, like on your phone. And Neely, we haven't talked too much about this, so I don't know if you've seen it as much, or you're seeing it too, but I absolutely have college age clients who are doing it, and parents of college age clients who are doing it. And some are doing it to a pretty significant level because it's just so accessible. And imagine you've got this teenager who's all into games and like getting this, buying this skin on here and doing this, and they're getting this like dopamine reward in all these aspects of their gaming. And then they go to college and they're rooting for their team, right? And the next thing is like, great, I'm going to bet that, they're going to be wearing the white jerseys with the little this helmet, and like, or this guy's going to have on this color shoes. And you can literally bet on anything in the moment. Like gambling and that kind of sports betting, I think, has changed so much. It used to be like, and I wasn't a sports bettor, so forgive me if this is not the right terms, but you would call your bookie on like a Friday, and then you have to wait till Sunday till the games happened, and then you'd find out if you won. Now I've heard you can literally go on your phone and be like, I think the next play is going to go, he's going to throw to this particular player, and you can bet on that in an instant, and then get an instant understanding of like, did I win or did I lose? And like, so it to me, it feels like this pipeline of like gaming, sports betting, gambling,
Mm-hmm.
and
Kind of
then
merging. Yeah.
yeah. And it's just so accessible. That's only been within the last even year. Like, other states are making it legal. So you could
Uh-huh.
only do it in so many states. And now it's pretty widespread. There's a lot kind of on the horizon. And I think these are the things, especially in the generation that's coming up. I think marijuana is going to be a big deal and
Mm-hmm.
is already.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that the gaming and the gambling is is going to be a big deal. And we're going to see what's going on with the social media use and how attached we are to our phones. And, and that's all of us, you know. It's
I'm glad you brought up the marijuana issue because I've been preaching it for almost a decade and
right.
nobody
Wow.
was listening to me,
Mhm.
especially
I hope they
early
are
on.
now. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I would talk about psychosis related to
Mhm.
marijuana, and they said, well, it must have been laced with something.
Right.
Those are the kind of things that parents would say to me.
Mhm.
They didn't want to believe that you could have a psychosis related to cannabis use.
Right.
Uh, how about the Delta 8? Are you
Right.
seeing some
Yep.
of that too? Yeah.
Sure, sure. And Delta 8. So
Earlier on here.
yeah, the Delta, I think it's Delta 7 and Delta 9 are
Mm-hmm.
so you have cannabis, the plant, and
Mm-hmm.
then part of the plant is hemp, part of it is marijuana, and and the marijuana is part of the cannabis plant that has a THC content that's just over a certain amount. So the marijuana has like a psychoactive property and hemp does not. And so the Delta 8 is taking the hemp product and adding sometimes THC and sometimes other things to it and
Mm-hmm.
selling it at a gas station because it's legal. It's not illegal to sell hemp because it's not psychoactive, in and
Right.
of itself. But they add a bunch of things to it to make it psychoactive. And so it's a product that's available that someone could get at a gas station if they're 18 or over usually. And so you've got something where people can get high where they don't need even a marijuana card to do it. But again, what is in it? What are we putting in our brains? Like it's very unregulated.
Yeah.
Although things are starting to come down the pike now, but yeah,
Mm.
it's basically like manufactured marijuana that's available to
Yeah.
anybody, you know,
Yeah.
with your gallon of gas or however much gas you need.
Right.
Yeah. you know.
Yeah, it's so accessible now, and you're
hmm
absolutely right about all the higher potencies and
hmm
the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome is something I've been
hmm
on to for a while.
Good for
Um,
you, Daryl. This is 10 years. It's impressive because like I
yeah,
don't
well,
know anybody that was
it
talking.
was kind of my hot button because
Mm,
of what happened to Chase, and so I really did a deep dive on all of that.
yeah.
And um, but it's good to hear it from other people who are
hmm
out there, especially from therapists and other professionals. And you're not the
Right.
first person to bring it up that I've interviewed. And as I knew more parents come into my pal group, and I work with other parents outside of that, the parents that are coming to me. More and more, I'm not hearing as much about opioids now. I'm hearing more and more about marijuana related issues.
Right.
Well,
So,
Daryl, the Family Recovery Collective platform has available resources around that, and we interviewed an expert in the field of marijuana treatment and
oh, good.
speaks nationally, and we have that interview on our platform as well. So we have a lot of resources. And Erin, even it's a Family Recovery Collective blog, but Erin was the
Uh-huh.
one who put it around marijuana. So, and that's available on LinkedIn, is it not?
Yeah, or
And
just on our website.
yeah, and on the
Yeah,
website.
our blogs are free on our website, and so that's there and
Yeah.
accessible.
For the parents listening to this piece, I would just say that your teenager or young adult will argue with you all day long. So you can have all the facts about marijuana, but they're still
Mhm.
going to argue with you. They think they're because they have a different set of information that they're getting, and they believe that
Right.
their information is correct.
hmm
And so it's really it's pointless to argue. It's good to be informed about that,
Right.
so that you know what's going on with them. And then, you mentioned something earlier, Neely, when you were talking about taking that walk with,
Mhm.
it was a teenager, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah. It made me think of this term I was going to use, really a validation. You can validate their feelings without agreeing with the things that they're saying, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. Would you agree with that, Erin?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Neely would as well. Yeah. That you can
Yeah.
listen, just be that place and that openness, and yeah, and just be inquisitive. Like you said, like you can't go at them like this is wrong and this is bad, but you can say,
Mhm.
huh, like have you seen, like sometimes this kind of stuff can make people feel paranoid,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
like, if that happens to you or your friends when you're doing it, I want you to know it's okay to come to me.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
that can be scary, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, just kind of opening that dialogue.
I did the exact opposite. I did all the wrong things that I tell parents not to do now,
Right.
because I freaked out, and it was like, I've got the military background, and I came
Mhm.
down with the iron fist, and what are you doing? And yelling and all of that sort of thing. And I can look back on it now and go, oh well, that didn't get me the results that I wanted.
Right.
And so yeah, I would definitely tell parents to don't have a knee-jerk reaction. Calm yourself down before you
Mhm.
have this discussion with your
Right.
teenager.
Right.
So,
But
And
it's hard because go ahead,
Daryl,
Neely.
well, I was going to say since I have three kids, what I can say about it is that I have to parent all three of them in different ways. They need
mhm,
different
mhm.
things from me all at the same time, and so I'm sure parents out there, some children are very compliant, and
Yeah,
others
yeah.
are up and against,
Hmm.
and that's just the way they came out. And I mean, hardwired. So, and then you add in what we were saying about adolescent brain development and that launch phase from
Yeah.
adolescence into adulthood. That's just its own experience. So, there's some really great resources out there about that. If parents are willing to go on that journey and explore that,
Hmm.
understand what's happening in their brains, to have a lot more compassion for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Any other things that you would like to say to wrap this up?
Yeah, we're so grateful that you invited us to have this talk and be here. And I love to meet and connect with other people out there who are doing similar work, and just wanting to be a source of information. And that's absolutely what we want to be for people, is a place that they can come. It's a low cost membership. We wanted it to be really accessible to people. We're at familyrecoverycollective.com, so it's pretty easy to find. And yeah, we'd love to be there and be a support to people when they're trying to walk through this.
Great. Thank you. Neely?
Yeah, thank you again, Daryl, for the invitation. I concur. There's my lawyer word. With Erin. And I would just say, when Erin and I were formulating the Family Recovery Collective, we thought about it this way. Families will come for the information because they are concerned about a loved one, but we hope they'll stay for themselves because they will feel seen, feel heard, and be a part of a community that is so important on this journey. That idea of, I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but I know that there's these other people who've gone on this journey, and they're willing to share their experience with me, and that they're willing to not judge me. They're willing to support me and encourage me.
Mhm.
That's what it's all about. All of us, all three of us on
Absolutely.
this in this
Mhm.
interview have had our own experience,
Mhm.
and we've all come on the other side of it with the awareness that we want to help others. And so you're not alone. That's another one of our taglines. You're not alone. So we hope that for families who are trying to figure out what their next steps are, that the Family Recovery Collective can be a part of their education journey.
Thank you. I'm so honored to have you both here with me. I appreciate you coming in today and talking with me and sharing with the viewers. So, I mean, what are the odds? It's the Family Recovery Collective. You're being interviewed by the Family Recovery Coach on the Family Recovery Summit. So,
Right.
and we just happened to find each other. So, it's great that it worked out that way. And I appreciate you both being here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Daryl.
Everyone, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in to When God Intervenes. If you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Your feedback helps us reach more families in need of hope and healing. For more resources and support, visit our website at thefamilyrecoverycoach.com. Until next time, stay strong and keep the faith.